Okay, you are live.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Good Tech, an ongoing discussion about smart and ethical tech innovation. I'm Jane Gideon, and I will be your host and moderator today. I'm a tech communications professional, and I have to say, cybersecurity is my jam. I am passionate about this topic, so I am looking forward to our discussion today. And today we'll be talking about cybersecurity risks in the cloud. With virtually everything moving to the cloud and with employees and customers working from anywhere, cyber risk has increased dramatically. According to CrowdStrike and Symantec, cyber attacks in general are up over 200% in the past year. And organized crime gangs are working together to exploit vulnerabilities exposed by more people working remotely. Ransomware attacks alone are up 84% just in the last year. So while the cloud comes with big benefits, it also comes with big security risks. Now, experts agree that implementing multi-factor authentication, or MFA, is a must for cybersecurity for any company of any size. And single sign-on combined with MFA not only simplifies access to company resources, but improves security by making attacks 99% less likely to happen. But protection is only good if people use it. So how can we be sure our employees and customers are utilizing secure access if we don't know what applications they're using? We're going to talk about the state of SaaS today, growing cybersecurity concerns, and what companies can do to better protect their digital assets. Now, if you have any questions during the show, please dial the number on your screen, and we'll do our best to get you in on the discussion. So let's get started. Today's guests are experts in helping companies solve some of the biggest problems in cybersecurity today with what they call ActiveSSO. What is ActiveSSO? Let's find out. Please welcome Trevor Graham, CEO of Amplify, which offers SaaS risk management solutions, and Heath Spencer, CEO of Traitware, which provides passwordless multi-factor authentication for zero trust access. Thank you both for being here. Great. So I want to start with you, Heath. As I mentioned, cybercrime is way up. Ransomware, scams, identity theft, phishing, emails, they've all taken a sharp rise, especially during the pandemic. What do you see as the biggest threat to cybersecurity for enterprise?
Well, believe it or not, it goes simply back to the password, something that ultimately, humans have been using the password since we were created. But at the same point, in the digital world, passwords were born for gated access to digital items in 1961 at MIT. And they were actually broken within, I think, 75 days, or misused, we should say, within 75 days of being created at MIT by an MIT student. This is all documented. People can go read about this, but it actually took like 25 years for that student to come out and say, hey, I misused this back then. So it's been a problem since it was created. So arguably, we're still dealing with this simple concept of we have to have passwords for all of the different things that we sign into for work and for our personal lives. And that's really our ability to manage those and make creative ones and make them strong is difficult and it's frustrating. And so we're seeing this need to eliminate or move to modern authentication and eliminate anything that could be shareable secret, right? A password is shareable. You can loan it out to your friend, or anything that's phishable, meaning someone could trick you into getting it. You take the bait and they've got you on the line, right? So anything that you have to manually enter, whether it's a PIN or a one-time passcode or a password, falls into those categories. And so it's time to move, away from something that we have to manage and enter as humans.
Wow, that's interesting. And Trevor, let's go to you. And what do you see as the risks around moving to the cloud?
Thanks, Jane. So look, we've seen cloud mature a lot over the last few years. And as that's happened, we've seen a shift in how organizations are using it. And these days, most companies are using cloud really in the form of SaaS applications rather than running their own apps. Those apps, so SaaS apps, they're generally accessed using web browser. They're chosen by the end user rather than the IT team. And they're completely under the control of the vendor that provides the app. They're up in the cloud. We've also seen a massive increase in the number of software vendors in use. Cloud has allowed that to happen. Typically, companies are using hundreds or even thousands of SaaS apps compared to a relatively small number of suppliers in a more traditional on-premise infrastructure. So that's a pretty fundamental change in how software is consumed, and that completely changes the risk profile. With traditional software, it was under your control. Your people managed the servers, the networks, the operating systems. They installed the app and they managed your data. That meant you controlled the risk directly. But now when you move to using a SaaS application, the operating model is different. SaaS, sometimes say SaaS is really more like an outsource arrangement than it is like software. The vendor provides and manages all the infrastructure. Your people don't have access or real insight into it. And the vendor is responsible for most of the security. You're placing a much greater level of trust in that vendor, and the vendor becomes deeply embedded in your day-to-day operations. So your critical confidential data is now in the hands of the supplier. You've got risks of that data being exposed through a breach or misused. So we've got this perfect storm. You're dealing with very many more vendors, and each one is much more tightly involved in your day-to-day operations. So you've lost visibility and control, and you really don't know that much about how the vendor operates and are they really looking after your data. So you've opened up this risk surface massively. You need to control that. And when your people use those apps, they're outside of the normal cybersecurity protections that you would provide. And any one of those apps could leak your data or could be used as a way to steal your users' credentials. And we're seeing this becoming a reality. SaaS is becoming a target for cyber criminals. The EU Cybersecurity Agency, ENISA, they estimated that there was a 4 times increase in supply chain attacks in 2021, and 2/3 of those were against commercial SaaS applications. So this is becoming a target. We all need to address SaaS application security, and it's a matter of urgency.
That's incredible. Clearly, it's a big issue. So I want to get to what you guys are doing to address this. Traitware provides what you call real passwordless MFA for true zero trust access. Passwordless and zero trust are two big buzzwords in the industry right now. So let's break it down. Passwordless. Lots of vendors claim to have passwordless solution, but what makes something a real passwordless MFA, and why is that so important? I'll start with you, Heath.
Thanks, Jane. And you're absolutely right. The password, related attacks today, many vendors are claiming to offer passwordless solutions to eliminate that threat. But there is a difference between passwordless experience and a solution that requires no password at any time from deployment to login. And really, it's about getting to strong authentication or multi-factor authentication. So looking at multi-factor authentication, verifying the user before granting access using multiple factors to authenticate who they are is an absolute must, as you've mentioned, because we need to be sure that each user is who they say they are before we grant them access. So we've deployed a patented native behavior-based biometric enabled login that also leverages your native biometrics. We're using your fingerprint or your Face ID on top of the behavioral biometrics, that we can deliver up to 5 factors of authentication that are inherent to the solution, yet transparent to the user. What we've seen traditionally is that as securities become a need, organizations and service providers have just added layers of friction for the user. We're frustrated with that personally, and we said, we got to fix this, and there should be a way to use technology to deliver the types of ways to authenticate a person versus forcing the person to continue to repeatedly prove who they are themselves. So, passwordless MFA needs to be something that happens from account creation, which means you never have to type anything. There's no password or passcode or anything to remember, which makes it, not only vastly more secure, but simpler for the user. It's simple, secure login in 3 touches. So when evaluating a passwordless solution, it's important to know if there's passwords anywhere behind the process, when many simply mask the password, making it invisible to the user, but it's still really there. So when you need to evaluate something, you can ask the questions of, does this login require a knowledge factor, a one-time passcode, a PIN, an SMS, one-time passcode that's sent to me at any stage? In fact, anything that you have to type in is what we call a phishable factor. It's a shareable secret, it's phishable, one that could be guessed, phished from a bad actor or socially engineered. We're seeing right now through social engineering, a lot of people, whether it's a fake support call, et cetera, anything that you could manually enter or verbally give out would make that vulnerable for the user and the company to attack.
Yeah. That is very interesting. And you talk about MFA. I read recently that even the White House of the United States has issued an order requiring MFA for any access to their servers and solutions. So let's move on to zero trust. Zero trust is a term thrown around quite a bit today. I heard Ann Johnson from Microsoft talk about it. As we look, here's what she said: as we look past the pandemic to a time when workforces and budgets rebound, zero trust will become the biggest area of investment for cybersecurity. This means that right now, every one of us is in a zero trust journey, whether we know it or not. So what is zero trust and why is it so important?
So zero trust is really a concept of a framework to, confirm that we can identify who or what is accessing an application, a service, or data at any given time. And it's a tough one because the term zero trust implies that we shouldn't trust our people, right? But what it really means is trust by authentication instead of granting automatic access, or what we like to frame as implicit trust. Think once I'm past the main gate, I'm trusted. So making sure users are who they say they are, so there isn't any unwanted access. Traitware in the zero trust journey, or this framework, has specifically focused on the human to service or human to data access. There are also other aspects of the framework that need to be considered, where it's application to application, device to device, etc. With what we're doing and what Trevor at Amplify is doing, we're really helping focus on the awareness of how people are approaching it. And this comes back to the mentality of, in the old days, we had this corporate perimeter, right? Kind of a castle and a moat approach to security. So we saw the invention of the firewall. And, once you were behind the firewall, then employees had access to all the company resources within a contained environment. And Trevor already mentioned this, the on-prem scenario where you managed all the applications and all of those things behind that perimeter, so a user could have implicit trust. But in today's digital world, much of our company resources live in the cloud, and a large portion of our workforce now, especially after the pandemic, is accessing those resources remotely and via devices that are outside the company walls and networks. This means security is a whole different ballgame today. And the challenge in what we're addressing at Traitware with real zero trust access is to protect valuables by assuming that all users are authenticated and then authorized, verified, without increasing any type of friction at every step of the process. We're currently seeing a lot of friction being added to the users, which drives pushback, and why we're seeing this very low adoption. If you look at the workforce identity space, even Microsoft just recently released a report saying they're only seeing a 22% adoption rate of strong authentication for all of their Azure environments. If you look at the public sector, what's hot in the news right now is Twitter, right? Mm-hmm. Twitter, even after having major account takeover from lots of people and then really encouraging people to deploy 2FA for Twitter, has only seen a 3% adoption. 3%. It's horrific. So it needs to become native to the process.
Interesting. And is that why single sign-on is so important, making it easier for people to employ security? Or how does single sign-on play in this world?
So single sign-on in this world really is geared towards the workforce identity, right? So when you're an employee at a company, single sign-on hasn't yet evolved really for consumer identity, but for workforce identity, there's two main things. What single sign-on has done, and we've seen a massive expansion with this, companies like Okta absolutely exploded in growth with just bringing single sign-on. OneLogin is another one that did that. And what that did is it allowed the companies to do two things: give their employees a single password to use so that they didn't have to manage a bunch of them to access all of these applications. So the advantage to this was hopefully they would make a strong one, right? Like one really good one to access all their applications. The vulnerability to that was now they had a single point of failure to all of their applications. The other advantage is that it gave the administrators within a company a way to try to manage the types of applications a user was using and control the access to those applications. And what Trevor's going to talk about, and what I'm excited about what they're doing is, especially after the pandemic, we've seen this user created, I need access to DocuSign and I need it today. And they go create their own account that's outside of that SSO portal. And so no one knows that they're using this, even though they're using it with company credentials and company documents. So SSO is a really good tool to help people control and gate the access while allowing access to SaaS apps that live in the cloud. So it gives you this way to control access and then monitor who's got authorization and all of those things. And I'm excited for what Trevor's doing and what he's going to talk about, how they can help monitor and control, where those apps live.
Perfect. Trevor, let's go over to you then to talk about, there's a lot of issues that Heath just outlined. So what can organizations do to manage all these security risks in the cloud?
Yeah, absolutely, Jane. And everything Heath has said applies, even more so to cloud applications than it does to enterprise apps on premise, as he said. But there are still a lot of things that an organization can do to start to address those cloud risks. The most fundamental requirement is one that's a little bit different than the on-prem world, and that is to understand how and where cloud apps are being used in the business. Heath alluded to this, that people just go out and find cloud apps and start using them. And that makes it really difficult for the security team and the IT team inside the organization. You can't secure the things that you don't know about. That's pretty fundamental. And since they're being introduced all the time by individuals and teams under the radar, you need to go out and actively search for them. And only then, once you've found all of the SaaS in use, then you can start to assess those applications. You can try to figure out what is the risk that's associated with each one of these, and decide which ones are appropriate for your business. And then if an application if it's just too risky, maybe based on the type of data it processes, or perhaps the supplier is based in a high-risk geography somewhere in the world, then you can choose to stop using that app. And by doing that, you remove the unknown unknowns, that risk that an app you didn't even know about has caused a security breach. And that gets you down to a core set of cloud applications that are critical to your business. And for those, you need to get the security basics in place, as Heath has outlined. You need to make sure you can control who accesses them, and you need to stop the bad guys from getting access. Security, user credentials are continuously under threat, and that's the weak link. As Heath said, you can't depend on perimeter security and firewalls as we did in the past, because SaaS apps are right out there on the internet and they can be accessed from anywhere.
Now, I've heard a lot about credential threats. What can organizations do to address that, credential threats?
Well, I mean, Heath has described in a bit of detail already about the zero trust approach, and I think that's really where we need to be going. We need to be going with cloud to a zero trust approach, as Heath has explained, so that you can be certain that the person who's logging into that SaaS app really is your employee. You need to implement that multi-factor authentication in all of your cloud apps, because, as Heath said, passwords are just a really poor security mechanism, and we're agreed on that. But when you're thinking about SaaS cloud with so many more apps in use, it's way more likely that user credentials will get compromised. The attack surface is bigger with SaaS and a lot less controlled, so you need to neutralize that threat. Now, we've seen examples where the hackers went after some low-value cloud apps just to get a user's password, and then they automate the process of trying that against hundreds of SaaS apps, because people do reuse their passwords everywhere. So you could have someone's password for, say, the newspaper from their hometown stolen through phishing or social engineering, and then the hackers could use that to get access to the company's CRM system or email, and the whole company gets compromised. And that's where TraitWare's solution is so exciting for me. Passwords really are the weakest link in application security, whether it's on-prem or cloud. And Heath's already talked about how passwordless authentication in TraitWare takes those out of the picture entirely.
That's great. So I know your two companies are coming together and you're partnering to create what you've termed as ActiveSSO. Heath, can you explain what that means and what problems you're addressing?
Yeah, so as far as ActiveSSO goes, the partnership that we've formed with Amplify in what Trevor's delivering is the ability to, really help identify all of the tools. As Trevor mentioned, the first step is knowing what tools your company's using. And without that, you really can't make it secure if you don't know it exists, right? So the second step is, once you know what your tools your company's or application your company is using, then you can start to identify what users have access to those applications as well, and then start to control that access. So from our side, providing customers with passwordless MFA for improved security eases the use and has been a game changer. But what we know is that companies, really need to know how employees and customers are accessing and using applications. So for an example, company X has deployed Traitware MFA SSO for simple, secure access to company applications. But what if certain SaaS apps were being bypassed by SSO? Meaning you've got somebody over in this marketing department that went and got their own Salesforce account on their own, right? And it's outside of, going through the SSO portal, and they just created their, have company credit card, created their own account. And so, that certain remote employee is using unsecure apps for, unsecure processes for accessing those applications that they self-created, et cetera. So with ActiveSSO, companies can get a closer look at how all of their SaaS applications from any of their employees from anywhere are being accessed, and will be able to make adjustments accordingly. And, I'll let Trevor take it from here.
Sure, thanks, Heath. I mean, look, I can only agree with what Heath is saying. Really, you'll probably have heard the term shadow IT being used, and that, that's been around since the dawn of IT, where people inside the organization go out and start finding the things they need to do their jobs better. But SaaS and cloud has just put that on steroids, and in many companies, there's this whole secondary stack of IT systems that are going under the radar and aren't managed centrally. We sometimes find that companies are using maybe 10 times as many SaaS apps as they thought they were, unconscious usage, hundreds of applications. So the scale of this problem and the rate of churn of this problem makes it, almost impossible to manage the issues that Heath's been describing manually. The security team just can't keep up. And another scale issue is the sheer number of SaaS apps that are out there. We believe there are about 30,000 SaaS apps in the world, from the really huge organizations like Salesforce and like Microsoft, right down to very minority SaaS applications developed by a singleton developer and brought to the market through the web. And across all of those organizations, there are a massive variety and an often quite inconsistent approach to things like passwords, MFA, and SSO. So it can be really hard for the IT team to understand how to get to a good, consistent policy for things like access control to those applications. Some SaaS doesn't even support multi-factor at all. And even when it does, we've seen cases where the implementations are frankly quite poor, and security researchers have highlighted different ways to work around MFA in some apps. And that can include some quite big names in the SaaS business. So the reality is that you've got this big problem with SaaS security in most organizations, which is really hard to resolve. And that's what ActiveSSO sets out to fix.
Interesting. We have a couple of questions coming in from users that I thought I would throw in as we're on target with our discussion. The first one is, let's see. How many SaaS applications as a percentage, a rough percentage, are modernized via standards like SAML? And how do they participate in ActiveSSO?
Trevor, you want to take that, or you want me to take that one?
Well, you guys are the SAML experts. Yeah. I can have a stab at a guess.
Right. So currently, off the top of my head, there is thousands of SaaS applications that are using, I think the latest numbers I saw were there was pre-created templates for over 3,000, and I'm sure that and it's growing end over end. We're in discussions weekly with companies that maybe don't have an authentication standard such as SAML or OpenID Connect, et cetera. We're seeing a big movement supported by a lot of massive organizations around FIDO, which is Fast Identity Online. That's a little bit more geared towards a lot of the consumer play, where SAML and OpenID Connect are how a lot of the SSO portals are functioning. those applications. So there's thousands of applications, and most of the predominant ones that any company would be using are already available through those standards. And the great thing about standards is, and I'll throw myself a little bit underneath the bus, is that it doesn't lock you, using standards, it doesn't lock you into a vendor, right? So you can choose best of breed vendor based on, hey, if I've got this at my endpoint, then I can plug in anyone that can work with these standards. And we like standards also because it's a community-driven way to bring the best of everything together. Open source standards and those kinds of things allow for all the brightest minds to increase security, increase usability, all of those things. So regarding, SAML, I would say is still the predominant choice. I think that the latest iteration of OAuth, which is OpenID Connect, OIDC, is growing really quick because it's allowing organizations to do an even better job of passing or parsing authentication with authorization in a tokenized identity payload. Hopefully that made sense to everybody.
If not, people can follow up and find you on LinkedIn and ask you questions. So, and I think this next question kind of gets into where we're moving with general, how ActiveSSO helps cloud security and SaaS as well. But the question is, when you're having a discussion with IT execs like CIOs or CISOs, how big a problem is SaaS application security relative to other types of applications well known to the IT department? So what's the risk in SaaS versus other normal applications?
Yeah, so if it's okay, Heath, I'll take that one, and if you want to chip in, you can. So I would say the risk profile around SaaS is completely different, Jane. That's one thing to be aware of. It's kind of, some things are better, some things are worse. It's that kind of feel to it. Obviously, cloud, I think the debate around cloud is kind of resolved to the point where cloud platforms in general, the big platforms, Microsoft Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, are intrinsically pretty secure. Those guys spend a lot of money on cloud, on security. They've got the best security engineers in the world, and the underlying platform can be very secure. But you're still very dependent on the individual SaaS vendor and how they make use of the security capabilities that are available to them. And you're trusting that they're going to develop their application in a secure way. That's one aspect about it, the intrinsic security of the app. The other issue then, I guess, is about the fact that because the SaaS app is kind of outside the control of the IT team, the ways in which your organization's people use the app is out of your control. And we've seen some good examples where perfectly good and valid applications were used for the wrong purpose. The wrong type of data was put in there, and organizations' data that should not have been public and should not have made it out into the wild did so because the SaaS app was being used outside of normal policy. So I think the debate around security is different with SaaS than it is for an on-premise app, but in many ways you've got just as many risks that come out of SaaS as you do from on-premise apps.
That's interesting. So we've got more questions coming in. I apologize to people because I don't think we're going to be able to get to all of them, because I want to move to a demo right now, because we've talked a lot about ActiveSSO and what you guys are doing together, but I think it's important to see it in practice. So can you guys give us a demo?
Yeah, sure. We've got a demo ready to roll, Jane. If we can get it teed up on the stream here.
Let's look at an organization that is already using several of license. To protect the organization from cyber risk, IT has configured these apps to use Traitware Passwordless MFA protection to authenticate anyone using them on behalf of the organization. However, in recent months, unbeknown to the IT and governance teams, users across the organization have also adopted a large number of SaaS cloud apps. These cover a wide variety of use cases and support many processes. Using SaaSGuard, the organization can get a view of all the services in use, whether an app is corporate or shadow IT. This report shows a summary of apps and their relative usage. From this, we can see that, as we would expect, our 4 corporate apps are heavily used, but we can also see that there is a lot of unexpected shadow IT. All this shadow IT has one thing in common. All of it is not currently protected using Traitware Passwordless MFA. At best, access is protected by other SSO tools, such as those provided by Microsoft or Google. However, most likely users have created local accounts in each system. Both scenarios introduce considerable risk, as the multiplicity of passwords and increased attack surface make it easier for malicious actors to penetrate the organization. Something must be done to remedy the situation. There is, of course, some shadow IT that should probably just not be used. For example, apps that are hosted in nations with excessive access to data, apps with poor data protection, or apps that duplicate existing corporate app devices should probably just be blocked using your firewall or something more user-friendly, like our SASGuard browser control. From here, things get a bit more difficult. Following analysis, you may decide that you will tolerate the remaining shadow IT as it offers business benefit, but the current approach to credential management is not acceptable. Action is needed to reduce the long-term risk in using these apps. To take the action needed, Traitware and Amplify offer a simple and well-defined process supported by our tools. The 3-step process involves understanding who is not protected, enabling passwordless protection for these apps where possible, performing ongoing monitoring to keep the situation under control, and repeat as necessary. The first step is to determine who is not protected, what apps are used, but not employing Traitware passwordless protection. SASGuard can tell us this automatically. We can easily see here the set of apps that are being used but not protected. As a cross-check, SASGuard can also tell us who is protected by Passwordless MFA. Once we understand who is not protected, we can visit each app and configure to use Traitware Passwordless MFA protection. For most of our apps, this is an easy step, as Traitware already supports these out of the box. For others, we may be able to utilize Traitware support for common standards such as SAML or OpenID Connect to enable passwordless protection. If we then return to SASGuard following the changes, we can now clearly see the larger set of corporate and tolerated apps now afforded full passwordless MFA protection. But the benefits of SASGuard's view of SaaS usage does not stop there. As an ongoing exercise, we can and should continue to monitor the status of SaaS usage across the organization. We can check that as we block users from SaaS access. Then we should see usage drop and eventually disappear. At the same time, we are also looking for the appearance of new shadow IT. If this happens, we will detect it early before it becomes a problem. We can then repeat the cycle of assessment and decide to block or tolerate each service. Unfortunately, our problems don't just stop there. Many SaaS apps consider SSO-based authentication to be optional. For example, Dropbox and Salesforce both have options that allow the parallel use of SSO and local accounts. So there may well be users who can bypass passwordless access, either for legitimate reasons or due to incorrect configuration choices. Either way, it's important to understand if such options are available to users and that they are not being abused. Because SASGuard is able to see all usage by individual users, we can detect where usage may be falling outside the acceptable limits. The partially passwordless report allows you to understand where such bypasses are happening. From this, we can decide if there's a problem. For example, allowing a small level of account access to something like Salesforce may be acceptable especially if we know by whom and when. But if this gets too large, we can take action to combat the problem by restricting access to local accounts even further in line with our business needs. Better SaaS management and control of our attack surface is possible with Traitware plus Amplify, or ActiveSSO, to allow us to continue to enjoy the many benefits that SaaS provides.
All right, thanks for that. This has been a very informative and insightful discussion. I appreciate your time. Like I said, cybersecurity is my thing. I love it. Glad to see what you guys are doing together to protect us all. I know we have lots of questions that have come in that we couldn't get to. So I encourage everyone, if you want to send those questions to Heath or Trevor, I don't think any of them for me, but we're all three on LinkedIn, and you can reach out to us there and get more information. I'm sorry we've run out of time, but as a reminder, this show is recorded and will be available on ubn.go/goodtech and on Traitware's YouTube channel or any podcast channel you choose. So feel free to like and subscribe if you'd like to hear more. I'd like to thank Heath and Trevor for today. Are there any final parting thoughts you want to leave since we didn't get to everything we were going to say? If there's anything important you want to leave everyone with, go ahead. Well, Trevor, you want to go?
I'd just like to say thank you, Jane, for having us on the show today. It's great, and I'm like the video said, the business we're in here is making SaaS safe for everyone to use, and I'd like to think that ActiveSSO with Traitware and Amplify can help do that and encourage the use of SaaS.
Perfect. And Heath?
Yeah, everything that was mentioned already, and just that, obviously with all the questions that came in, we'll get copies of those and try to answer them as best we can out to people. And obviously, if there's enough demand, we will do another one. And then happy to have direct conversations with anyone that wants to as well. Just let us know, and we'll do that.
Perfect. Yeah, there is a lot of chatter out there, so maybe we'll have to do another one soon. So thank you all for joining. Thanks for being here. Have a great morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you on the next Good Tech. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane.
Thank you, Jane.